Welcome to the Wyoming Women's Business Center's 2020 webinar series. Today's presentation is Selling Skills Course Number 5, Closing the Deal. I'm Christine Langley with the Wyoming Women's Business Center, and I'm going to be your speaker today. So just to clarify, this webinar is fifth in a series of 6 webinars focused on selling skills, and each session is recorded and available for viewing to all registered attendees. Now you'll notice the GoToWebinar control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and I want to call attention to the questions panel. If you have any comments or questions during the webinar today, I want you to use those to communicate with me. And immediately following this presentation, a survey is going to launch, and so we ask you to complete the survey because it provides us, as well as our funding partners, with valuable information. So everybody's muted to minimize background noise today. So once again, if you have any questions during the presentation, just type them into that questions panel. All right, so we're going to get started with some quick information about the Wyoming Women's Business Center, and then we'll dive into our topic today and finish up with a Q&A at the end. This is our new 30-minute format, and so we appreciate everybody joining us today on what might be your lunch break. So the WWBC is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to enable and empower Wyoming entrepreneurs with a special emphasis on women who are economically or socially disadvantaged. And so we do that through 4 distinct programs. The first is our business counseling and training program, which is always free. The second is our microfinance programs, which offer microloans and individual development accounts. Third is the Artist Development Center. We run that in conjunction with our Works of Wyoming store and our Art Connect gallery in downtown Laramie. And lastly, we recently launched our COVID-19 support program. Now, today's webinar is brought to you by our microfinance program. And so I want to call special attention to the microloan program embedded. We can provide loans for those unable to get loans through traditional means, and we do that up to $50,000. So if you'd like more information on the microloan program, you can contact our office. All right, so let's do a quick recap of our sales funnel from our very first session. We talked about identifying the stages of our sales process using these terms, and that our goal is to drive people from suspects to prospects, prospects to customers, and finally, customers to advocates. And so while we do this, we understand that there's leaks in our funnel and that we lose people or people drop out of our funnel as we make progress. And that means we need a strong marketing plan to ensure that we're always adding new suspects and prospects to the top of our funnel. So today we're going to cover the last essential in selling, which is asking for the sale. And if you remember from our last session, we already satisfied our prospects' needs by presenting our features and layering our benefits all the way down to an ultimate benefit, and then we used a tie-down question. We also completed a trial close to gauge the interest of our prospect, and because we had all buying signals from our prospect, we then proceeded to our recommendation, and now it's time to close. Now, before I give you all the options for closing questions, I want to review some statistics around closing. And remember that we only close deals when we actually ask for the sale. And so that means we have to ask. So that might seem obvious, but believe it or not, there's a real fear out there around asking for the sale or asking people for money. And so my hope is that implementing the steps of this process is going to make it easier for you to ask for the sale. All right, now assuming we've asked for the sale, there's always a possibility that our prospect could say no. And if that happens, I want you to remember that an overwhelming majority of people, like 80%, give a salesperson at least 4 no's before they ultimately change their mind and decide to try out a new option or a new solution. But at the same time, virtually all salespeople, like 92%, don't ever make it that far, right? They give up early. And so this doesn't even take into account how many salespeople or founders kind of linger in that maybe zone forever without ever getting a definitive answer from their prospects. So this statistic doesn't mean that every prospect is just 4 no's away from turning into a yes. But the clear takeaway is that sales is often a long game, and the majority of prospects aren't going to close right there on your first cold call. So, by the simple act of just committing to follow up with prospects, building a relationship, staying in touch with your best prospects, that would be those that stand to benefit the most from whatever you're offering, you're going to rise to above the vast majority of the competition. And so, that being said, all the tools in the world can't help you close a sale if you don't have a step-by-step formula to follow and fall back on, one that's been tweaked and perfected over time. And so, luckily, building our sales techniques really isn't a new concept, and there's lots of tried and true methods that you can add to your repertoire. So today we're going to cover 12 of the best sales closing techniques that can help you evaluate any situation and try to stop those firm no answers with your own great response. Now, the first 3 closes that I'm going to cover today line up nicely with our consultative selling process that we've learned so far. And all the remaining closes are actually typically used in conjunction with overcoming an objection after we've asked the closing question. But we're going to cover them today because there might be some of you that joined us for today only because you feel like your closing technique is what needs the most help. So that's why I'm going to cover all 12. But again, the next 3 are the ones that align best with the training that you've received so far. So let's start with the assumptive close. Now, this close is based on the concept that you firmly believe you're going to make this sale from all the information that you've gathered so far. So the language you've heard and used throughout your meetings would indicate that you believe this sale is a done deal. And the key to this technique is really checking in frequently on your prospect and gauging their level of interest and responding to their objections and determining if they're on the same page as you. And so in our consultative selling process, we've already done this by using our trial close along with other affirming questions throughout our process. So if everything's gone smoothly up to this point, then an assumptive close likely makes the most sense. Now, why does an assumptive close work? Well, because your confidence and your positive thinking is contagious. And it'll make the prospect think that the answer should be as obvious to them as it is to you. It's going to work best when you're working with familiar leads or prospects and you know that the product is a perfect fit for them. Now, you shouldn't use this if you don't have a relationship with the prospect or if you've heard repeated feedback throughout your presentation that the solution just does not make sense for them, in which case an assumptive close also wouldn't make sense. So an assumptive close might sound something like, all right, so I think we can get you started next Friday. Does that work for you? All right, next up is the hard close. It's also known as a direct close, or sometimes people call it the nothing to lose close. All right, now this is a tactic that involves you letting your potential customer become really aware of the fact that you're trying to sell them something. You're going to ask for a firm commitment, like, can you sign the contract today? Or when can you set up implementation for this? Or anything else that actually gets them to close now or give you a response. Now, why would this work? Making what you want really clear can sometimes help a person feel a little more at ease, as though and even though they may not say yes, at least they're going to give you a firm answer so you can start trying to overcome their objections. Now, a hard close is going to work best when you're pretty sure you're not going to be getting a yes, right? Or you have no other options but to essentially solicit objections, right? You're looking to find out what their objections are. Now, you shouldn't use this if you're still in the really early stages of following up with a prospect and you haven't gotten to a point where you've been able to present all of your features and benefits. Then a hard close or a direct close doesn't make sense in that situation because they're not ready. All right, next up is the option close. This is also known as a contained choice close. And this is a sales tactic that is the final option in consultative selling. where you're offering your prospect a choice between two or more options, hoping that they're going to choose one rather than saying no. And so offering two different pricing plans that suit their needs, or tiered levels of service with different features, or implementation like earlier versus later, those would all be examples of option closes. So why would this work? Well, with two or more viable options in front of a prospect, they might be more likely to choose one. Have you ever experienced someone saying, we have three different packages or three different plans, right? Silver, gold, and platinum. And often people will choose the middle one. They'll go with the gold. You can even choose a cheaper option or two choices because it feels like maybe they're saving some money. This is going to work best when you have tiered service levels or tiered product levels, and you know your prospect would benefit from both of them. So hopefully the choices that you're giving them are kind of on par with each other, and they're just going to pick the one that meets their needs the most. Now, you shouldn't use this if what you're trying to sell is static, meaning you don't already have confirmed interest in like unique features or your product offers. All right, so now we're going to get into popular closing strategies for those of you that are just interested in closing training. And again, if you've attended this selling skills training from the very beginning, those top three I just reviewed should be plenty to choose from and really all you'll need to remember. But let's go ahead and cover the rest of the common closing strategies so that you can see how they could be used in helping you overcome an objection. And we'll dive into overcoming objection strategies next week. Now, this summary close should sound a little familiar if you've been attending the training, because it's really similar to trial closing and making your recommendation. This is called the summary close, and it's when you take some time to summarize all the benefits of your product and the main value points it would bring to your prospect. So you can also use this to make distinctions between, say, two or three possible options that you're offering, and to help remind your prospect of what all their options are. So the reason that this can work is because hearing all the benefits at once can seem a lot more impactful than the 30 minutes you already spent going over them. It's going to work best when you know your product's a good fit and your prospect just needs a quick reminder of all the things they agreed would work for them. Now, you shouldn't use this if your conversation has not been very long or your main value points didn't seem very impactful on your prospect, right? The summary close is used when everything in your consultative process is going really well. And again, in our steps of the selling process, this summary close is really indicative of our recommendation and trial close. All right, next up is the suggestion close. Now, this is another version of a hard close tactic. And in this conversation, you offer your opinion about what would work best. Kind of sounds like a recommendation, right? So you're going to offer firm statements that explain, say, how a shipment on Friday would solve that problem. Or if you sign a contract by this date, then your onboarding would be well before the quarter end. And you mentioned that as a need. All right, so why would the suggestion close work? Well, when your opinion enters the mind of your prospect, it does so kind of the same way that facts do, because you're offering them firm solutions for some of their problems. This, of course, is going to work best when you have a pretty good personal relationship with your prospect, or you think that they can be easily influenced. You don't want to use this if your prospect is unknown to you, or they're actually more of an expert in this particular field than you are. Then making a suggestion probably doesn't make sense. All right, the now or never close. So you offer your prospect something that they can only get if they commit within a certain period of time. So examples of this would be things like, well, this is the last product we have remaining. Or, well, anybody that buys today gets a 15% discount. If you sign up today, then you take priority in the implementation queue. Or this price is only for a limited time until tomorrow. right? I'm sure you guys have heard the now or never close in your everyday life. Now, why does this work? Because it feels pretty salesy, right? Well, the reason that it can work is because the prospect now feels that they might lose out on something. So if they're planning on saying yes eventually, it may just make sense to go ahead and do it now. So even though we all recognize that this is a closing technique when it gets used on us, it doesn't mean it doesn't work, right? Sometimes we go ahead and take advantage of whatever the discount is that's being offered or whatever the implementation schedule is that's being offered because we were probably going to say yes anyway. Now, it works best when you have the freedom to offer discounts. So if you're in a position to be able to do that and you're dealing with people whose main objection is that they just don't have time to decide right now, then this is a great option for closing. You don't want to use it if the prospect's made clear that your product would never implement well at their company, or you can't really offer a significant incentive, or that's not within your purview. So you don't want to use it in those cases. All right, next up is the Columbo close. So some of you may remember a TV detective show called Columbo. His famous one-liner was, "Just one more thing." And then he would go into a question. And that's become kind of a mantra for a lot of talented salespeople. And so after a suspect or a prospect thought that Columbo was done with them, he would put them on the spot while walking away by turning around and asking for just one more thing. And so once you think your prospect is ready to leave, this can be like a last ditch or Hail Mary effort to make them stick around. So why would this work? Well, whether you're demoing a product or selling consulting services, if you hit them with the most enticing part of your pitch, once they've indicated they don't want to listen much longer, that can sometimes turn that prospect around. Now, again, in a consultative selling process, you should have already covered this. You should already know from your needs analysis what their hot buttons are, and you should have addressed that in your features and benefits presentation. But for those of you that are tuning in just for closing techniques, again, this is the Hail Mary last-ditch effort. All right, moving on to the takeaway close. So the takeaway close, if anybody has ever heard this used on them, you might be smiling at this. This concept is pretty simple. If you've already laid the benefits out to your prospect and they don't seem to be interested in like certain aspects of what you're offering, then you can take them off the table. And so what you do is you offer cost savings by removing certain features that maybe the prospect doesn't need. And you see if they're more inclined to take your offer at that point. So why would this work? Well, lots of people object simply because of price. And that's actually the best objection that you can get. If you can narrow down your objection to just price, then we know what we're working with. So if you can counter that objection by removing things that they don't need, then hopefully everybody wins. It's best to use this technique when your platform is multi-tiered, right? What you're selling has several different options within it so that the prospects really made clear that they don't have a use for certain features. So if you're selling something where you can pull certain aspects of it out and that makes it less expensive for the customer, then that can be helpful and the takeaway close can work really well. Now, you don't want to use this type of close if the prospect isn't objecting to price, right? Because we don't want to decrease the value in what we're selling out the gate unless we absolutely have to. All right, the sharp angle close. Now, some people hear sales pitches all the time. And so they understand that they have the upper hand in the discussion and they're in charge, right? They might ask for add-ons or discounts knowing you expect them to. And so to deal with these types of seasoned negotiators, you can take them by surprise with the sharp angle close. And if you have approval to do this, you can give them what they want but with a price. So it'll sound something like, yes, I can offer you 3 months of service for 10% off, but only if you sign the contract today. So why would this work? Well, you give the prospect something you were already willing to, and in exchange, you receive a firm commitment and make the sale right away. It really works best when you're dealing with people who get sold to a lot, right? Or who ask for incentives to sign. These people are easy to identify early in your sales process because they're always asking, what is the price from the get-go? Or they're explaining to you what their budget is and what their expectations are as far as what they're going to pay. Now, you don't want to use a sharp angle close if your prospect isn't familiar with sales or sales nuances, and if they're not asking for anything special or unique from you. There's really no reason to give a discount if you don't have to. All right, next up is the puppy dog close. Now, based on the concept that people who walk into pet stores and hold puppies are more likely to buy them, that's where this close comes from. And you make your sale by letting your prospect basically try it out or test it. So, good example of this is when you test drive a car or someone gives you a free trial of a service, or they let you keep a product for a month, or they give you a tester of a product. All kinds of examples of test driving a product or service. Now, why would this work? Well, the hope is that if they start using the product, then the benefits you talk about would become real and ideally something they realize they can't live without. It really works best when you have a product that allows for a trial period or has features that aren't always easy to quantify over the phone or by email. So if you've got the type of product or service where people really have to try it to get really excited about it, then the puppy dog close might make sense. Now, you don't want to use this when your product really can't be test driven, right? Because it would make sense. Or if it doesn't have a great variety of features and benefits that would benefit you in having people try it. So remember that this is for more of a complex type product or service where a trial makes sense. And now we have the question close. So we definitely cover this tactic in detail next week when we discuss overcoming objections. But the concept is that asking your prospect probing questions can really force them to actually explain why something does or doesn't work for them. And so you're going to ask them why you can't proceed with the sale or with a shipment, or why a particular feature wouldn't solve their problem, and so on. So the question close is really asking direct questions as to what the problem is. And the reason that this works is because questions give you a far better opportunity to explain why your product meets their needs. And it's going to work best when your prospect seems kind of perpetually on the fence, right? They're just not sure. They just can't seem to make a commitment, but they're not really explaining why they aren't interested. So you're going to use the question close and just ask them directly what the problem is. What's the holdup? What's preventing them from saying yes? What's the thing in the back of their mind that bothers them right now that they just can't get over the hump to making a commitment? You're just going to ask them straight out. And so we don't want to use this close if the prospect's already clearly stated the reasons why your product doesn't work for them, right? So if they've already told you this information and then you ask again, that's just going to create irritation, right? So we don't want to use the question close if we already know what the problem is. But if you really are perplexed and you're just not sure where they're at, what's happening, and why they're saying no or why they're not excited, then it's best to just ask the question. All right, guys, last but not least, the backwards close. Now, I hesitate to teach this because it goes against almost all sales cycle training out there, and it goes against what I've been teaching you, over the last month or so. But it's also been known to work with certain types of prospects, so I'm going to go ahead and cover it today. What this method involves is actually starting at the end And instead of trying to sell your customer, what you're doing is you're asking for referrals rather than trying to sell at the onset of the relationship. So you're really treating them as an expert and asking them if they know of anybody that would be interested in your product or service. And then you can pitch your product or service in a way that maybe isn't as intimidating to them, because you've clearly defined that your goal with them is to simply get referrals or find out who they think you should contact. And hopefully through that process, they identify their own needs and realize that they would be a good prospect or customer for this product or service. So why this works, right? By recognizing that you aren't trying to sell to them, then the potential customer is going to feel more at ease and they may be more open to listening to what you have to say. It works best really when you know the person and you found their information potentially through a referral as well. Or you already have an indication from them that they really have no interest in what you're selling, or they think they have no interest in what you're selling. Now, you shouldn't use this if you're really early on in the sales cycle and you have no reason to doubt your ability to make the sale, in which case referrals can come at the end when you're wrapping up the sale, just asking for future business or future leads. And that is the backwards close. All right, guys, I've got some time for questions, just a couple of minutes. And so I'll give you guys an opportunity to write into the questions panel if you have any. I know that was a lot of information in a short period of time, but no fear, it's recorded, and I'm going to be sending out that link to everybody that's registered. And so while we're waiting for people to ask some questions, I'll just go over some quick information. You know, the Women's Business Center is actually made possible through lots of partnership agencies, but our primary funding comes from the U.S. Small Business Administration and then also the Wyoming Business Council. And so, of course, we're thankful for their support and their guidance, and we look forward to our work ahead. This is some contact information for the Women's Business Center. You'll see my contact information in the lower right-hand side of your screen, my phone number and email. I'm always available for you guys. If you need to do some role playing in your sales calls, I'm also available for that, as is our other business counselors at the Women's Business Center. So these are our upcoming webinars. Actually, tomorrow we've got Sell Online this holiday season with e-commerce tools. And then our final course on selling skills, number 6, is Overcoming Objections. And we're going to be doing that next week on Tuesday, October 20th. So that's a bit of a change from some of the marketing material that went out. But we just made a decision that we think we're ready to close this out. And we're excited to finish up with number 6 next week. Again, October 20th from 12 to 12:30. And then we also have an Expert Insights webinar coming up on photography, where we'll have 3 professional photographers talk about the skills that they use in order to capture businesses kind of best, and how to use that in your marketing materials. So if you're interested in joining us on October 21st, that's Expert Insights. And so when we close out today, guys, I just asked you to complete our survey. We have changed it a little bit from the last couple of sessions, and so we're interested in your feedback. I want to thank everybody for attending today. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and we'll see everybody next week for webinar number 6 on overcoming objections and finally wrapping up the sale. Have a great week, everybody. Bye-bye.